Bitcoin is the most perfect form of an energy-backed currency that I think has ever existed. It has the best chance of disrupting the last several hundred years of one particular group or nation holding the world reserve currency. I think it's our best chance at having a neutral reserve asset that's used worldwide.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Behind Their Success podcast. I am Peyton Squires, the host, and today we have on Beau Turner. Beau is the founder and CEO of Abundant Minds, a pioneer in sustainable Bitcoin. Get ready for some real stories and actual insights and advice you need to fuel your entrepreneurial journey. Beau, welcome on Behind Their Success.
Thank you for having me on, Peyton. I'm really excited for this.
Absolutely, Beau. So Bitcoin mining, I'm in the financial space. I've been a guy that's following crypto for quite a while. Felt like I caught on a little early. We're in like a bullish market now. So tell us, I know you started your career in real estate. How did you make that switch to crypto?
Yeah, well, there's a very long story and then there's a slightly abbreviated one. But the short story is I thought real estate was going to be my vehicle to build and maintain wealth far, far into the future. And I had been exposed to Bitcoin for a few years, but wasn't really paying active attention to it, just kind of owned a little bit passively. I wouldn't say that I had done my 100 hours, much less my 1,000 hours of research at that point, but it was interesting and I owned some. And then 2020 was a huge year of change for me, not just in terms of what was going on in the world, but also making the decision to move across the country and really kind of having the tail end of the passion and initial interest that I had in real estate. So had the waning desire of being a full-time real estate investor at the same time that people like Michael Saylor were coming onto the scene and starting to talk about Bitcoin in a way that was much more appealing if you were thinking about how do I invest as an institution? How do I invest large portions of capital? And it just spoke to me differently. And so that was the start of me beginning to think, you know what? Maybe I'd like to store my value somewhere else and not in properties that are kind of a headache for me to manage, especially if they're several states away. And so I started the process of liquidating property and buying Bitcoin. And the shift that happened was I kept liquidating property, but I didn't want to lose the cash flow that those properties generated. And so I had an engineering background. I went to school for engineering management and information systems. So I had some coursework in data centers. I knew how mining worked. I knew that that was the closest thing that I could get to rental property like cash flow in the Bitcoin space and keep many of the same tax advantages that real estate investors rely on to make it even more attractive to be in that space. So started selling more and more properties, and after a certain point was no longer buying Bitcoin, but buying Bitcoin miners. And an early experience with a not so scrupulous and not so skilled host that I was sending those miners to led me to actually build my own facilities up here in Oregon. And we've been offering that service ever since.
Very cool. I kind of love this crypto space. It's something, I kind of told you, I think off air, it's something I've been following around. I think it first made on my radar, just like the concept of Bitcoin, I don't know, 2015 or something like that. I bought in a few times and then just sold immediately when it doubled. Funny enough, I found an old crypto account the other day, no joke of mine. Amazingly enough, I had an old crypto account out there from 2017. It only had a few $100 worth of Bitcoin in it, but now it's worth like $3,000.
Wow.
Like 2017. But anyway, I say all that. I've gone down that rabbit hole a little bit, and it's interesting to talk to other people that have gone down that rabbit hole and how, man, when people go down that hole, man, a lot of times they dive in head first, and they have it seriously changes the way you think about things, right?
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing, especially starting to tell my story a little bit more, is many people will ask me at this point, how much of this should someone have? And I have to give a very different answer of how much someone should have versus how much I choose to have. And, a balanced, if you're giving someone financial advice, I think a balanced approach would be somewhere between 1% and 20%, depending on how convicted and how committed you are to what it is and how much you understand it. But, the further down I've gone into the Bitcoin rabbit hole specifically, I'm edging way past 90% at this point of whether it be Bitcoin
Yeah.
or my
Yeah.
company, like there's almost no
Yeah.
part of
Yeah.
my
Tied
financial
up in that
future.
market. Right.
Yeah, yeah. There's nothing in my financial future that's not in some way correlated to the Bitcoin industry.
Yeah. 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 That's cool. That's cool. So what led you specifically down the mining route, even more so down that route? I know you got that engineering background a little bit. Speak to that a little
Yeah, so mining is interesting for a couple of reasons. And there's the investment case, and then I would say there's the kind of like moral or engineering case that makes it really interesting. And the investment cases, same amount of capital outlay over a period of time, you get to potentially, as long as you do it well, mine more Bitcoin than if you had bought the Bitcoin on day one. So if you're optimizing for stacking the most Bitcoin, doing mining properly is a great vehicle for that. The other reason is I mentioned really briefly the tax advantages. So if you're buying Bitcoin on the open market with after tax money, that's an intangible asset. There's no depreciation schedule.
bit.
It doesn't do anything to offset your taxes. Whereas if you're buying computing equipment and you're paying for operating expenses to operate that computing equipment, you actually have a business. And businesses, as most people are aware,
Yeah.
are a little bit easier to navigate the tax code with. You have more levers to pull. So mining was the vehicle for me to do it well. You can make more Bitcoin and do it structured properly, and you actually can mitigate some of the high income years and actually have a few more levers to pull so you're not paying too much in taxes. And then the engineering and sort of like ethical side of it is I felt a calling, and I have felt a calling to find the things that are poorly understood and even misunderstood. And mining is one of the most misunderstood parts of the Bitcoin space in general, and shine a light on them. And for years and years, it was hailed as this kind of horrible thing that's extractive on all of our resources and is a
Yeah.
drain on
Killing
the
the
environment.
environment. Yeah. Yeah.
Plenty of
Mhm.
now debunked academic studies were saying that it would use more energy than every other industry on Earth by several years ago.
I love those projections they throw out there.
And what I found to be true was it was actually in many cases the most positive force on the environment that you could possibly put into a community, and actually lowered the cost of energy because it's such a flexible resource. It doesn't have to be on 100% of the time. It's way cheaper to set up than like an AI data center or traditional data center. It has a very different profile of how it interacts with energy systems. And the coolest implementations of this are in places like landfills or oil and gas wells, where they've got essentially just methane rich pollutants that are otherwise going straight into the atmosphere, that if you put a generator and a mobile data center on top of, you're not only making money with, but actually mitigating some really serious environmental harms. So the more I dove into it, the more I was like, man, this is not just a great way to make money. It's actually a kind of an ethical imperative to participate in this and help it flourish.
Did I read up in, you're in the Oregon area? You guys using some hydropower around that, I guess?
Correct. So we use hydropower along the Columbia River at our main sites. We're also currently developing a couple that would be using landfill gas.
Mhm.
So working on those projects, those are still relatively early. And then not only that, but actually these things produce quite a bit of heat. So on the back end of that computer channeling all that electricity, you don't lose any energy to data. It all gets exhausted as heat. So we're finding ways to repurpose that. And our second site right now, we're building a greenhouse. So that'll be a place where throughout the winter in these cold climates, you can actually grow fresh food year round and give it back to the community.
That's amazing. That's some cool stuff. So, Beau, I'm going to give you kind of the big overarching question to the people that haven't gone down into these rabbit holes. Can you high level explain to the listeners why Bitcoin has value?
Oh, this is such a deep question.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I know.
I'll say there's so much knowledge that you could unpack with this, but um, I think the overarching theme is that the best monies in history have been in some way connected to energy. And we've been in effectively a monetary experiment for the last 50 years or so, in which money has been connected only to political authority and doesn't have any sort of energy backing it. So whether you talk about gold, or gold really would be the most historically close to analogized to Bitcoin in terms of a commodity money that takes energy to find and purify and turn into some form of way that you can actually use a currency for day-to-day existence that worked for hundreds of years in many different cases. And what you find if you look through history is that when people were on a gold standard or a hard money standard, there was widespread prosperity and a evolution of how people cooperated together. And even in cases like the Roman Empire, there's many reasons why the Roman Empire fell, but one of them was because they started to clip coins and reduce the purity of them and essentially
Clip
use
points. Yeah.
use ever inflating monetary supplies to fund a bunch of wars. And we're not living in such a different time now where the money is the prime tool of being able to finance endless conflict and enriches a few and otherwise creates a very destructive pattern. So why is Bitcoin valuable? How does that have anything to do with Bitcoin? Bitcoin is the most perfect form of an energy backed currency that I think has ever existed. And in fact is perfectly energy backed to the point where it doesn't leak any. So that's the fixed supply nature of it. So you would know there's only 21 million coins that will ever exist. And so it's effectively this capped vehicle that can never be inflated, that can never be expanded, and continues to absorb more and more of the world's economic energy. As long as you can store your economic energy with integrity far into the future, you have a great tool for cooperating with other humans. If there is a leaky bucket, so to speak, of that economic value and it's inflated away by an expanding monetary supply, that over time, even if it's very subtle, leads to cracks and inefficiencies in the system, and in fact perverts incentives of how the system operates and who gets to control it. So there's a lot more that you could do to dive deeper down that rabbit hole. I would recommend anybody check out the 7 properties of money to understand a little bit better why certain monies have value. And I've made the mistake of trying to remember all 7 live on shows, and I'm not going to make that mistake this time. But suffice it to say,
You're not going to rattle all off for us? Come on.
I'm not gonna. I need a sticky note in front of me. But suffice it to say, Bitcoin's an improvement on every one of those, except for the one which is how long it's been in existence. So that's the one fault,
just
but also
proof,
the
yeah.
opportunity. Gold is great
Yeah.
because it's been around for thousands of years and used as a money for a very long time. And Bitcoin's only 15 years old at this point. So that's a ding on it for being a global money. But if you see the rest of the characteristics and you can identify good systems before everybody else, I think that's really the opportunity, is catching on to something that's technically sound and just has yet to be proven by the test of time.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, and you're right. In many ways, it has the characteristics that more perfect money. Like, for example, like, yes, gold is limited to a degree. I mean, limited to a degree to our ability to extract it from the earth, which, like you said, makes it tied to energy. But maybe there's some massive gold discovery someday that, that it has the potential to be inflated away. But, and you talk about like empires or countries and whatever as they go down their path and eventually get corrupted and fall apart. You're right. The monetary supply almost is always at the crux of that. You see large empires that spread your empire, you get your colonies. Well, all of a sudden you got to protect all your interests. You kick up all these wars across the world. And then you run out of resources, and then you get money, and eventually it all topples over. The listeners wanted a great book on that. Ray Dalio, the Changing World Order. Fantastic book. He doesn't say that we're necessarily, the United States is necessarily at that point, but he makes the case, and a strong case, that like, man, we check a lot of those boxes.
That's a great book reference. And actually, that came into my awareness around the time that I was really starting to dive further down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. So that he doesn't really talk about it much. I wouldn't consider Ray like a Bitcoin bull, although he has at different times.
Yeah, he's not like a Bitcoin guy or whatever. Yeah.
But that context, that kind of backdrop of you see a rise and you see a fall, and there's many different criteria for why a nation or an empire does really well, and then there's a kind of unwinding of that trend, and it's just over and over you see something replaced by something else. And who's to say that that's Bitcoin? But at least in terms of how it's designed, I would say it has the best chance of disrupting the last several hundred years of one particular group or nation holding the world reserve currency. I think it's our best chance at having a neutral reserve asset that's used worldwide.
Yeah, which can be good or bad depending on what side of the table you're sitting at, and how well you're prepared for that, for sure. So you're doing the Bitcoin mining. How do you connect like investors and stuff too? Just tell us a little bit about that piece.
Yeah, so the way that Abundant Minds works is like you would come to us and say, I'd like to get into Bitcoin mining. And essentially it's a very turnkey service where you are just writing a check or, sending us a Bitcoin payment. You then become the owner of a physical machine with a serial number, and that machine lives in one of our data centers in Oregon. And of course, you can always come out to visit, see it, take pictures with it. But effectively, most people don't want to manage a computer, learn how to repair a hash board or replace a power supply, and they may not have the setup in their garage or office building to deliver the kind of power at the rate that's needed in order to operate these. So people are coming to us, they're purchasing a computer, they're paying a monthly operating expense, and then getting all of the Bitcoin that that machine produces. And it's not an investment per se, where someone's like giving you money and then you're getting shares in a company. It really is just a physical piece of equipment that has an output, and you're paying a management fee to run. So people come to us in all sorts of structures, from just an individual to small business to even having us do the fulfillment for a hedge fund or a investment fund where there's hundreds of partners, where we're taking care of the operations, doing all the maintenance and running the machines, and they get to just reinvest their profits back into buying more, or take their Bitcoin and run or save it, whatever it may be. But the idea is a fully managed service to make you Bitcoin passively.
Yeah. And this, I'm assuming, and this is making me some assumptions. I assume there are some business people that invest in that just from the depreciation purposes of some of that.
That is,
I mean, that's a part of it, right?
I would say that it makes the most sense. And just to put disclaimers, I am not a tax, finance, or legal advice professional. I can tell you that most of the time it makes the most sense to hold this within the context of a business. Yeah. And that is going to open you up to the most favorable depreciation and offset characteristics, where yes, this can be essentially an investment vehicle that helps you write down your taxable income.
Yeah. I'm I don't know if we even talked about it, but I am a CPA and super trade. So I'm well versed in the tax side of all of it. It could be an interesting play, but once again, all this, obviously for listeners, this is all generic advice. None of this is specific to any one listener.
Yeah. If anybody wants specific advice, obviously come to you. But that's part of the reason that we designed the service in the way that we did, is that if it's just us offering a piece of equipment with operating expenses, that gives you the most flexibility on the back end to structure it and hold it in whatever way is the most advantageous for you. So there's not this predefined cookie cutter, you have to set it up this way, otherwise it doesn't work. You can come in as a GPLP, you can do a sole prop, you can, as far as I understand, hold it in tax advantage accounts as well with the right structuring. So it's this really flexible vehicle. And that's what I wanted, right? I mean, when I first got into this, I didn't set up a new entity for it. I just started mining in my real estate entity and gradually made the shift from a real estate investor to a data center real estate investor to a Bitcoin miner. And so that's the kind of flexibility that not putting it into a predefined structure where only accredited investors can participate kind of opens up the field.
Yeah, like you said, that gives you the ability to, raise as much money as possible and allow the investors to, just structure it in a way that's for them. So along your journey here, Beau, I'm sure you've made a lot of decisions you maybe thought you could have done differently. Can you point to maybe a moment, or you may call a mistake or whatnot, but an area where, man, maybe you misstepped, and what is like a lesson you've taken from that?
Yeah, the origin story for the company really was me trying to mine with somebody else who was offering a similar service to what we offer, but not nearly as good and not actually fulfilling any of the promises of that service. So the story of that, or the mistake in that, was not properly vetting a partner and really just taking what was offered at face value. And that was, I mean, the most painful mistake, but also the greatest opportunity that was ever given to me was that experience. It was about a $500,000 loss all told, where these machines were poorly treated, not put online at the right time. I got billed a huge amount of money, like $30,000, to just go through and have a college intern do repairs that never actually really lasted, never kept these things online. And it was just a very rough experience. And it was at a time where I had just gotten engaged. And so I was like, wow, okay.
It's just like, oops.
Yeah, so about that wedding that you wanted to have, that was really beautiful. That might have to be delayed a little bit. So really rough experience, but also the reason that I started the company. So because I had a bad partner, a bad counterparty, it only made me want to be a good partner that much more, and build this service. So I never had any intention of actually offering hosted mining and Bitcoin mining as a service to people. I really just wanted to be a miner myself. I was not trying to build a business like this. And that experience was so raw and so just destructive and infuriating that I felt like, you know what, this is going to be my public service, is to actually improve upon this industry and raise the standard for everybody. So pick your partners wisely.
Yeah. Without going too deep into any of my own history, I can relate on that kind of thing. I've had amazing partnerships. I've had a couple that were just, man, but yeah, just terrible. I mean, I'm talking six figures. Yeah. Those kinds of things. And, it is amazing that you have taken that story, right? That's such a raw experience that you could have just shut down and quit or done anything. But like, you took that raw experience and said, you know what? I'm going to use this energy. I'm going to use this pain. So now you've created something that you didn't even know was even possible for you.
In a way, it was the gift that gave me my mission.
That's great.
Big fan of Dan Martell, and he'll say often that your purpose lies next to the worst thing that ever happened to you. And so far, that is the worst thing that's happened to me, at least in terms of business and investment. And so it really, really motivated me to go out and do something better. And I could not be more grateful now in hindsight to that man for providing the service that he did, because if he hadn't, there's hundreds of people who I would have never had the opportunity to impact. And I've had the chance to see really beautiful things unfold for our clients, and even just my team members having a really beautiful sense of purpose in their lives, getting to serve people in this way. And that's not something that I was originally set out to do. And I was just put on that path by that experience. So, the other piece of advice, I guess, would be, don't let any of your mistakes or really raw run-ins with the dark aspects of life go unused later on. There's a lot of gold to mine there.
Yeah.
A lot of Bitcoin to mine there as well.
Yeah, a lot of Bitcoin to mine there. That's right. Yeah, no, I mean, I noticed the Dan Martell book over your shoulder. I got the same one. Yeah, Dan Martell, great book there. Buy Back Your Time. Fantastic. Full of practical stuff. It's always the setback that always sets you up for, kind of a fling forward. And it's really like that in a lot of places of life, not just business, but like, it's very noticeable in business. So like, often it's like, okay, you build up a business, you're kind of plateaued, and you really got to break something, take a couple steps back, right? To be able to then shoot up. You can't really build anything great or extreme or quick growth without usually having to stop doing a lot of the stuff that you're doing currently and have to do a totally different thing.
Yeah. What I've found and seen often is that many of the greatest companies and products that have ever existed have been people scratching their own itch, like solving their own really frustrating problem. And so getting out of school, I didn't really have that kind of beautiful unicorn startup idea to immediately go work on. I was like, okay, I guess I'll focus on this real estate thing. That early experience in mining looking back, like, wow, really grateful that that happened, because that gave me the most frustrating problem in my life that I could solve that could actually be a service into the market as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And my personal story is like the last business partnership that I had go bad, like it set me up. It forced me to make my business, I mean, 10 times better and just processes and the way we went about things. And it wasn't maybe a year after that separation that I could, or I'd say even 6 months after that, where I said, whoa, I already see why that happened. Right. Like I could already tell, like, oh, I needed to go through that to force me to change to do what I actually should have been doing for a long time.
Yeah. It's the mark of an evolved person, I think, who can very quickly go from turning their pain into wisdom that gets applied. And the shorter and shorter that gap is, I think the more impact you can have around you. And I am still learning. I'm today years old, a student of
No.
life. But
Yeah.
the shorter you can compress that gap, I think the better you are off, and the better everybody else around you is as well.
Yeah. That's great advice.
Are you looking for a new tax experience? Looking for an advisor that actually brings you high-level ideas and proactively plans so you aren't overpaying your taxes? Or how about one that even just responds and communicates in a timely fashion? If any of that resonates with you, you probably just have a tax preparer and not a tax planner. And it is through the tax planning process where all the value is found. And when tax planning is done right, it has a positive return on investment. I'm Peyton Squires. I'm a CPA and owner of Squires Tax Planning. We work alongside entrepreneurs and high-income earners, helping them pay the least amount of income taxes, both legally and ethically. We have saved our clients hundreds of thousands of dollars through specific strategies, and we guarantee we can find multiple tax strategies that your current tax preparer hasn't told you about. If that interests you, head over to squirestaxplanning.com. There you can take our free assessment to see how likely it is that you are overpaying on your income taxes. From there, you can also book a free tax discovery call with our team to see what it would look like to have us working for you.
So, Beau, what piece of advice would you give to any of the listeners that are maybe they have a business, maybe they're not as passionate about it as they thought? What kind of advice could you give, or maybe they haven't even started a business, but what kind of advice could you get for somebody who's just like trying to find something passionate about that lights them up? I assume you're quite passionate about what you do, and it doesn't feel like you work that hard, right? Sometimes when you're that passionate. Not that you don't work hard, I'm sure you do, but what kind of advice would you give somebody that's just looking for their quote unquote passion?
Yeah, that's a really hard one, because as you mentioned, it's a second source of energy to have passion about something. And it makes the 12 to 16-hour days feel much easier if you love the mission that you're on. And the downside is, if you don't have that passion, someone who does is going to outwork you, and they're going to be better at it. They're going to have more staying power than whatever the thing is that you think you can do, but you don't really like. The person who is just on fire with inspiration to get that done is always going to be ahead of you. So finding something that ignites that within you is one of the most important things that I think you can do. And it's really tough to force as well. So it's not something that I think you can give someone a prescription of, well, just follow these 6 steps and your passion emerges. I think it comes to two things. You can either be inspired by something that uplifts you, or you can be running away from pain. And in my case, I was lucky to get both, where I had a painful experience that absolutely sucked, that made me want to go build something better, that aligned with the inspiration of what I believe Bitcoin is for the world. And that's a really unique gift that I could get both of those. But if you could start with one, something that really grinds your gears, that uniquely frustrates you, you might have some extra energy to go solve that problem versus anybody on the street who's just, casually observing. And then conversely, if there's anything that interests you or inspires you, or that you feel like time disappears when you're doing your research or thinking about it, a good barometer is, if you would do it for free, you might want to try to find a way to make a business about it, because you could actually be really, really good at something that you would otherwise do for free and can feel effortless to you. And you can do for 12 hours a day something that might be very frustrating and cumbersome for others. I think about, CPAs are a great example where like, I can't even imagine going through what you guys go through, and is not something that lights me up. And I will happily pay you every day of the week to do reconciliation and tax filings and navigating codes. And God, there's so much that I have absolutely no interest in doing, but the creative way to navigate that space lights somebody else up. So, in short, find something that uber frustrates you or lights you up and makes you want to get up in the morning. And that's a good direction to head in. And then bounce, find the things that do work and the things that don't work. And I don't have it all figured out. And every day gives me more information of refining what direction to go in. But it's hard to get that feedback until you start going in a direction.
Yeah, that's so true. I think passion is more like built. By that, I mean, like, you go around, you start playing with different things. You take note of what gives you energy, what doesn't give you energy, what you like, what you don't like. And, when you find those things you fall in love with, right? Like you really like doing, and like you said, you got into flow and time disappears or whatever while you're doing that. It's amazing if you fall into those things and you pursue those things, you're going to get good at it, right? Whatever that is. And amazingly, when you get good at things and you're in flow, then you're like insanely passionate about it, because I'm like, hey, look, I'm really good at this thing. And when you're really good at something, you automatically become more passionate about it. But it's tough, right? It is a matter of kind of trial and error and exploring it. I was lucky enough to stumble on several things that I'm pretty passionate about and I have really gone deep in. And sometimes I just contemplate that question too. And I don't really have an answer of like, hey, go do this. This is how you figure that out.
You mentioned that it's kind of like letting the energy of compounding show you what your passion is. And whether it's business or investing or building skills, there's something to be said for, it's really tough to see early on in the growth curve how much you're compounding, because you'll see any kind of, so you might not discover that you're passionate about something. I mean, this is just to tie back to my story, I was exposed to Bitcoin for like a good 5-6 years before I had any inclination that I might want to spend more than like a couple minutes a quarter thinking about it. And it's that tail end of the growth curve, which I would still say I'm very early in the growth curve on my journey in this. But, year 6 through 10 were much more obvious how deep and how you wake up one day and realize, oh, wow, I'm one of the foremost experts on this thing called Bitcoin mining. That's actually kind of wild. I never thought I would say that about anything. And it just kind of happened because you ended up spending quite a bit of time in all of the surrounding areas. So finding your passion might just take a little bit of patience, actually, of just trying something and letting something marinate.
Yeah, it is that letting things marinate. And you're right. It's the compounding effect, right? Like the first 5 years of anything, it's like the growth is so tiny, it's not even noticeable, right? Like I tell that to entrepreneurs all the time. It's like the first 5 years of business just like suck. Like if you're lucky, you get through it and you've maybe built something, right? Like, but really, like you don't see those gains at all. And it's like going to the gym, right? Like you go to the gym for a week, you look exactly the same you did at the beginning, or it's like, so, you know what I mean? It's so tiny that it's unnoticeable. But you don't realize those changes are happening under the surface, or at least under the human consciousness there. And you have to continue. This is where you talk about like action and faith together. You have to continue in faith until it shows up, and knowing that, oh man, everybody else works out like this and they get the results. I can too. It's just amazing ahead. You got to keep on a path. And you talked about entrepreneurs all the time. Why most of them struggle is because they jump into a business, they're in it. They jump into real estate because their buddies, it's 2021 and their buddy just made a bunch of money. Oh, everybody can make money in real estate, right? They jump in and realize, oh, well, you know what? This doesn't just spit out money with no effort or no business built, right? And then they go like, oh, this is way harder than I thought. And then they quit. And then they jump to trading crypto. But you know what I mean? It's like you're jumping from thing to thing to thing. You never get more than an inch deep in any area. So you have no skills on anybody. And you just get mad and quit and believe the lie that the next thing is going to be the thing that magically works for you. Until you decide to go deep into anything, you're just kind of wasting time, in my opinion.
Yeah. There's something to be said about staying power and consistency and continuity. And you let that compound over long enough, you can be really mediocre and unskilled and absolutely whip everybody else at something just because you've got the benefit of way more experience and time than they do. And I heard this so much growing up of people who were, very successful in their later years over and over saying, listen, there's nothing special about me other than I've been doing this thing that you're impressed at me about for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. It's not that they were immediate savants within year one or two. And that's very frustrating, especially if you're early on in the journey. But, something that came up as you were talking is if someone doesn't know kind of like what direction to go in, a good place to start is if you could be the best in the world at something, what would that be? Like what if you could pick any end state that's worth putting in just years and thousands of hours, like let's call it 10 years, because if you quit around year 5, you might be just starting to see the results. 10 years into anything to become world class or best in the world at something, what would you want that to be? What would actually bring you the most joy to be the best in the world at?
Yeah, that's a great question for people to consider. And, like 99% of podcasts don't make it past 20 episodes. To be in the top 1% worldwide in podcasts, you just have to make 21 episodes. And that is just shows you it's just pure time, right? Like you beat 99% of people just by showing up and just continually do the work. And then you improve. And like my first 20 episodes were the hardest ones to do. And now I've built systems and it's amazing enough where I've built a podcast that now like guests come to me all the time, right? And the first 20 people, I had to hunt people down to come on the show, right? You hit some tipping point at some point, and it's different in all different areas, but eventually hit a tipping point where you don't even have to chase stuff anymore. It just comes to you because you have made yourself good. You have made yourself attractive, and you really attract the kind of stuff you want.
Yeah. In today's day and age, I mean, momentum really is a superpower. Everybody wants the viral moment that comes very quickly and is effectively overnight success. But just the sense of building momentum, whether it's in a podcast or a business or a skill, is its own kind of self-sustaining energy where you go from having to seemingly push a boulder uphill day in and day out just to make any progress to suddenly it's rolling downhill and you can't even stop it because it's moving so much. And I have been so blessed to have people around me to help carry this vision forward, because the first couple of years was really just me and a technical co-founder, engineer, like somebody to help keep the vision alive basically, but was really me just day in, day out, making sure everything was held. And at this point, I mean, I wake up and it's unbelievable how much happens around me without me guiding it, without me pushing it forward, in many cases without me even knowing about it. And that's the wild thing is you put enough time and effort into something to get people to come build it with you. And the sense of, holy shit, this thing has a life of its own that would go on with or without me. I'm happy to be on the journey. I'm happy to be the tip of the spear. But this really is self-sustaining momentum that I'm not having to push. It is pushing me forward, and I get to just feel the wind at my back. That is what we do all this for, is to experience that level of things working out.
Yeah, man, that's great. And that's getting to the top level of entrepreneurship, I would say. It's like you've got to that point where you've built something that's become way bigger than you. And like you said, it's got all its forward momentum and you're just along for the ride, and it's forcing you to develop, right? Not you trying to develop and force it up the hill, but eventually starts dragging you with it. Yeah. Beau, man, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you. If you could leave one piece of advice to the listeners, what would it be? Just so, listeners and entrepreneurs, on their journeys at different stages, if you can give us all one piece of advice, what would it be?
I think the most expensive thing that you can do in your lifetime is ignore the things that spark your curiosity and not give them the attention and space that they deserve. And often so hard if you are just living day to day to find time to do the things that light you up and bring you joy if you just feel like you need to survive. But every spare moment that you can give to something that connects you to that higher purpose, that higher intention, the spark of creativity or intention or inspiration, every moment that you live more in that space connects you to the ultimate purpose, vision that you're here to live out. And there's nothing more satisfying than getting closer and closer to being on that path every day. And so if you ever have that sense, please don't ignore it. Please listen to it. And it'll be subtle at first, but the more often that you tune into it, the more often that you can tap into the energy of knowing that you're on the right path, the easier it'll become to just live there. And then life becomes really the most fun game you could ever sign up to play.
Yeah. Stay curious. That's what it's all about. Curiosity, pursuing curiosity. Well, Buck, I appreciate you, man. What is the best way people connect you, get to know more about you, Abundant Minds, or anything like that?
Yeah, the easiest way to find me would probably be through our website, which would be abundantminds.com, MINES. We also do a ton of education in the Bitcoin space, a little bit more in depth than I can ever get in a 40-minute window. On socials, the handle would be @AbundantMinds, and we're on YouTube, X, Instagram, LinkedIn, pretty much everything that there is a platform for. I would say YouTube has the most rich content and long form content, and would love to get a chance to work with you. My team is always happy to help, even if you're just looking for advice in the Bitcoin space that you can't find in one of our videos. We really just want to help people understand more about the space, whether you mine with us or not. So appreciate you giving me some time with you, Peyton, and this has been super fun. This is a great conversation.
Yeah. Absolutely, Beau. I appreciate you. Listeners, you're interested in the Bitcoin space at all, Beau is obviously one of the top experts in it. Go check out some of his resources, or you'll find him on the internet. I know he's got a lot of videos out there of explaining some of this complex stuff that, as a guy, I've been trying to wrap my head around it for years. And every time I listen to more of it, I'm like, I didn't quite understand that till this time. So you can go way down that rabbit hole. But Beau, appreciate you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Peyton.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. If you found it valuable, please rate, review, and share it. That is the best way to help us build this and reach more people, as we're trying to accomplish our goal of help creating more healthy, wealthy, and wise entrepreneurs. You can follow us on social media by searching for me, Peyton Squires, or going to PeytonSquires.com. On the website and social media, we're always sharing tips of personal growth, and there we can actually interact. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, guys.